There is a person you keep meaning to become. You can almost picture them. Someone a little braver than you are now. A little more honest. More disciplined. More awake. Someone who finally does the thing you keep putting off. Who says what they actually mean. Who lives the way you quietly believe you're supposed to live. And somehow, that person is always just ahead of you. Always starting tomorrow. Always waiting on the far side of some change that never quite arrives. So here is a gentle question to sit with, in the quiet. If you are free, genuinely free, then why aren't you that person already? What exactly is stopping you? There was a man who spent his whole life on that question, and who gave an answer that is harder and stranger, and in the end more freeing than almost anything else in modern thought. His name was Jean-Paul Sartre. His answer began with an unsettling idea, that there is no person you were meant to become. No blueprint, no hidden true self waiting to be discovered. That you are right now, nothing but the sum of what you have actually done. And that this is not a tragedy, but the most liberating fact about your life. Over the next while, we'll follow his thinking, slowly, from one question to the next. And by the end, the gap between who you are and who you mean to be might look very different than it does right now. So let's begin. Jean-Paul Sartre was born in Paris in 1905. His father, a naval officer, died when Sartre was barely a year old, and that early absence, he later said, left him strangely free, a boy with no father's expectations to live up to. He was raised largely by his grandfather in an apartment full of books, and he more or less grew up inside that library, reading everything, deciding very young that he would spend his life with words. He was small, and an illness in childhood left him with a wandering eye and very little sight on one side. He was not, by his own cheerful admission, a beautiful man. But almost everyone who met him described the same thing: a ferocious, restless intelligence and a kind of magnetism that filled a room. At university in Paris, he met the person who would shape the rest of his life, the philosopher Simone de Beauvoir. They became partners in a bond that lasted over 50 years, unconventional and deeply loyal. Two thinkers who read each other's every page and argued each other's every idea. They were, in a sense, a lifelong conversation that never ended. Then the war came. Sartre was captured by the Germans and spent months as a prisoner of war. He came back to occupied Paris and lived through those grey, dangerous years writing, teaching, and quietly resisting. And it was out of that occupied city, where every small choice could carry real weight, that his great book emerged. Being and Nothingness, published in 1943, in the middle of the war. After the war, he became something almost unheard of for a philosopher, a celebrity. His ideas spilled out of the universities and into the cafés, the newspapers, the streets. Young people across Europe began calling themselves existentialists. And years later, when he was awarded the Nobel Prize in Literature, he did something almost no one does. He turned it down, unwilling, he said, to be turned into an institution. But here is what matters about Sartre before we go any further. He did not treat freedom as a comfortable theory. He lived through a time when human beings were being told exactly who to be, by armies and by states. And when looking away from your own choices could mean betraying everything that mattered. His philosophy of freedom was forged in a place where freedom was not abstract at all. And it begins with a single, strange idea. One that quietly pulls the floor out from under almost everything we assume about ourselves. Sartre's whole philosophy rests on a phrase that sounds technical, but turns out to be intimate. Existence precedes essence. To feel what that means, picture something simple. A paper knife, a little blade for opening letters. Before that knife ever existed, someone had it in mind. They knew what it was for. Its purpose, its shape, its reason for being, all came first in the mind of the maker, and only then was the object brought into the world to match. For the paper knife, essence comes before existence. It is defined before it is made. For most of human history, we quietly assume that people work the same way. That before you were born, there was already an answer to what you are for. Maybe a God had a plan for you. Maybe there was a fixed human nature, a blueprint written into your soul, a purpose stamped on you in advance, waiting to be lived out. Sartre's claim, the one that everything else grows from, is that this is exactly backwards. For a human being, he said, existence comes first. You showed up in the world before there was any answer to what you are for. No maker stood over you with a design. No purpose was issued with you at birth. You simply exist, and only afterward, slowly, through everything you do you become anything definite at all. You are not a paper knife. You are the stranger thing, a being that exists first and defines itself second. This is why Sartre said, in a line that became famous, that man is nothing other than what he makes of himself, not what he was born as, not what he intended, not what he could have been, only what he actually makes, in his choices, his actions, the concrete shape of his days. Sit with that for a moment because it cuts both ways, and both ways matter. On one side, it is frightening. It means there is no script, no instructions came with you. There is no fixed self buried deep inside you that you could uncover, if only you dug far enough, that would finally tell you who you really are and what you're supposed to do. That self isn't hidden. It simply isn't there yet. It is still being made. But on the other side, and this is the part Sartre wanted you to feel, it means you are extraordinarily, almost dizzyingly open. You are not a finished object. You are not trapped inside a nature you were handed. Whatever you are making right now, and you are not done. A knife cannot become anything other than a knife, but you are not a knife. You are the being whose whole existence is the freedom to define what you are. And that word, freedom, turns out to be far heavier than it first sounds. We usually think of freedom as a gift, a bright, weightless thing. Doors flung open, options, possibility. Sartre saw something else underneath it. He used a phrase that catches the whole weight of his philosophy in 4 words. We are, he said, condemned to be free. Condemned. It is a strange, heavy word to attach to freedom, but he chose it carefully. Because if there is no blueprint, no given purpose, no nature deciding things for you, then there is also nothing to fall back on, nothing to take the decision out of your hands. Every moment you are the one choosing, and there is no escaping that, ever. You did not choose to be free. You simply find yourself free already, with no way to give it back. That is the sense in which freedom is a sentence as much as a gift. And notice how total it is. Even when you feel you have no choice, you are choosing. When you stay in the job, the habit, the relationship, telling yourself you have no other option, you are choosing to stay. When you refuse to decide and let the days carry you along, that drift is itself a choice. There is no neutral place to stand, no pause button, no way to step outside your own freedom and simply be moved by circumstance. To be human, for Sartre, is to be choosing always, whether you admit it or not. Which is why he placed such enormous weight on responsibility. If you are always choosing, then you are, in a deep sense, the author of your life, not the author of your circumstances, which you often did not pick, but the author of what you make of them. You cannot finally hand that authorship to your parents, or your past, or your situation, or your luck. They gave you the material. What you do with it is yours. This is a demanding idea, and Sartre knew it. It strips away every comfortable excuse. The phrases we lean on, "I had no choice. That's just how I am. Anyone would have done the same." Sartre would gently take each one apart, because each one is a way of pretending the freedom isn't there, of setting the weight down, of acting as though something other than you is holding the pen. But you can feel why we'd want to set it down, because freedom this complete doesn't feel light at all. It can feel like standing at the edge of something vast, with nothing to hold on to. And that feeling, that particular dread, has a name. Sartre thought it was one of the most revealing experiences a person can have. And it points us straight at the question we started with. Imagine standing at the edge of a high cliff, looking down. There is a fear you would feel. The ordinary fear of falling, of the ground giving way, of something happening to you. But Sartre, following a thread that ran back through Kierkegaard, noticed there is a second feeling, stranger than the first, hiding just beneath it. It isn't the fear that you might fall. It's the dizzying realization that nothing at all, is stopping you from stepping off. That you could. That the only thing keeping you on solid ground is your own choice, moment to moment. And that this choice is entirely, frighteningly yours. That second feeling, Sartre called anguish. And it is not a fear of the world. It is something closer to vertigo before your own freedom. We feel a version of it far from any cliff. It rises up in the quiet moments, often at night, when the noise of the day falls away, and you sense, without quite saying it, how open your life actually is. That you could change, that you could walk away, or begin, or speak, or stop. That almost nothing outside you is truly forcing your hand. That the shape of your life is, to a degree you'd rather not feel, up to you. Most of us do not love that feeling. It is heavy. It is exposed. And so, very naturally, we look for ways to make it go quiet. And here, at last, is the answer beginning to form to the question we opened with. Why aren't you the person you mean to become? Part of the reason is simply this, that becoming them would mean standing fully in your own freedom. And freedom, felt honestly, makes us dizzy. So we find ways not to feel it. We have, in fact, become remarkably skilled at it. Sartre gave that skill a name. He called it bad faith, and it may be the most useful idea he ever had. Bad faith is Sartre's name for the lie we tell ourselves to escape our own freedom. Not an ordinary lie told to someone else. A lie where the person doing the lying and the person being lied to are the very same person. We convince ourselves that we are less free than we are, because a smaller, more determined self is so much easier to carry. He gives an example that has stayed famous ever since, and once you see it, you start noticing it everywhere. Picture a waiter in a café. Watch how he moves, a little too precisely. He balances the tray a little too perfectly, bends to the table a little too eagerly, recites the specials with a touch too much polish. He is, Sartre says, playing at being a waiter, performing the role with such complete commitment that there is no daylight left between the man and the part. And why? Because if he is simply, fully a waiter, the way the inkwell on the table is an inkwell, then he doesn't have to face the dizzying truth that he is a free human being who has merely chosen this morning to do this and could choose otherwise. The role is a hiding place. To disappear into being a waiter is to be relieved for a few hours of the weight of being a free person who is only pretending the role is all there is. That is one face of bad faith, shrinking yourself down into a fixed thing, a function, a label, so that the freedom underneath can be ignored. Sartre describes the other face with a second scene, a person on a first date being gently pursued, who can feel exactly where the evening is heading, and who chooses, instead of deciding, to simply not notice, to talk of ideas, of lofty things, while leaving a hand resting there, as if the hand belonged to someone else, as if the body's situation were happening to them rather than something they are living and choosing. They flee their freedom in the opposite direction by pretending to be pure mind, pure spectator, floating free of the actual concrete situation they are in. So bad faith has two doors, and we slip through both. Through one, we pretend we are only a thing, fixed, determined, defined, with no freedom to answer for. Through the other, we pretend we are only freedom, abstract, weightless, never quite responsible for the real circumstances we are standing in. Either way, the trick is the same. We split ourselves in two so that the part that chooses can disown the part that is chosen. And now listen to how this sounds in an ordinary life, because you have heard it and you have said it. I'm just not a confident person. That's simply who I am. I'd love to, but I'm not the kind of person who does that. I had no choice. It's too late for me now. My work is who I am. I can't help it. It's just my nature. Every one of these is, in Sartre's eyes, a small masterpiece of bad faith. Each one quietly converts a free choice into a fixed fact. Each one takes something you are doing and renames it something you are, so that it can't be questioned and doesn't have to change. I am shy turns 1,000 small choices to stay silent into a single, unchangeable thing you simply are. It sets down the weight. It makes you, for a moment, as solid and excused as that inkwell on the table. And here, finally, Is the full answer beginning to land? Why aren't you the person you mean to become? Often it is this, because becoming them would mean owning your freedom, and bad faith is so much more comfortable. It lets you keep the dream of the better self safely in the future, while explaining, very reasonably, why the present self simply cannot get there yet. It is the most understandable thing in the world. And it is, Sartre would say, the quiet machinery by which we avoid our own lives. But there is an objection rising here. A fair one, maybe the fairest one of all. Because surely some of who you are really isn't a choice. Here is the honest pushback. Aren't we shaped deeply, really, by things we never chose? Your genes, your childhood, the country and the body and the century you were born into, the wounds you didn't ask for. Surely Sartre, of all people, isn't pretending that none of this is real. He isn't. He had a word for all of it. He called it your facticity, the sheer set of facts that make up your situation. You were born in a particular place, to particular people, with a particular body and a particular history trailing behind you. None of that was up to you. It is simply, factually, the ground you are standing on. Sartre never denied it for a moment. But here is the move that makes him Sartre. Your facticity is real, and it does not decide what it means. The facts are given. Their meaning is not. Two people carry the same wound and become opposite people because of it. The same hard childhood becomes, for one person, the reason they could never, and for another, the very thing they refuse to pass on. The same limitation is a wall for one and a strange kind of doorway for another. The facts sit there, fixed and unchosen. But what you make of them, the meaning you give them, the direction you turn them, the story you build on top of them, that is yours. And it is never finished. So when you say that's just who I am, Sartre wants to draw a careful line. Part of what you're naming is real facticity. Yes, this happened. This is your situation. This is the material. But the conclusion you've drawn from it, and therefore this is all I can be, that part is not a fact at all. That part is a choice, wearing the costume of a fact. It is the past reaching forward to excuse the present. You are, he insisted, always more than your past. Not free of it, you carry it everywhere, but never simply equal to it, because you are the being who is always, right now, deciding what that past is going to mean, going forward. You are not a stone-shaped, once and for all, by the river. You are the strange thing that keeps choosing, again and again, what the shaping adds up to, which means the person you mean to become is not waiting on better circumstances. They are waiting on you to stop treating your circumstances as a verdict. But there is one more thing pressing on you, shaping who you are, and it is harder to wave away than your past, because it isn't behind you. It's sitting across the room. It's other people. So far, this has all been about you, alone with your freedom. But you are almost never alone. And Sartre thought that the presence of other people changes the entire experience of being a self in a way that is both unavoidable and often quietly imprisoning. He builds it from a small, almost embarrassing scene. Imagine someone crouched at a door, looking through the keyhole. Caught up in what they're watching, they aren't thinking about themselves at all. Their pure attention pure absorption, barely a self at all in that moment. And then, a sound in the hallway, footsteps. Someone is there. Someone has seen them. And instantly, everything changes. A flush of heat, shame. Because in that moment, under the gaze of another person, they become an object, a thing seen, judged, summed up. A second ago, they were a free, watching subject. Now they are, in someone else's eyes, a voyeur at a keyhole, fixed and labelled by a look they cannot control. This is what Sartre called the look. When another person truly sees you, you feel yourself become, for them, a kind of object, something defined from the outside, pinned down, summed up in their judgment. They have a version of you, and you can feel it, and you cannot fully reach it or correct it. Part of who you are is suddenly being decided somewhere you cannot go, behind another person's eyes. And so a whole quiet drama opens up, one you know intimately. We spend enormous energy trying to manage the version of ourselves that lives in other people's heads. We perform. We adjust. We reach for the look we want and flinch from the look we fear. We become, without noticing, who we think we are being seen as. And this is where Sartre wrote one of the most quoted lines of the century from his play about three people locked together forever in a room. Hell is other people. It is almost always misunderstood. He did not mean that other people are awful, or that we'd be better off alone. He meant something far more uncomfortable. He meant that when you let other people's judgments become the mirror you live by, when you let their gaze define who you are, you hand them the keys to your own self. You become trapped inside their image of you. The room with no exit is the one where you've made other people's opinions the walls. And notice, this, too, is a flight from freedom. It is one more way of becoming the person you mean to be, only on someone else's terms. Living inside the gaze is its own kind of bad faith, letting the crowd, or the family, or the imagined audience in your head write the self you were supposed to be writing. So that is the trap, laid out in full. We hide from our freedom in fixed roles. We excuse ourselves with our past. We dissolve into the judgments of others. 3 doors, all leading away from the same frightening, open room. The room where you are simply free and responsible and unfinished. The obvious question is whether there's a way to live that doesn't run. And there is. Sartre's word for it is one you may have heard worn smooth by overuse. But he meant something precise and bracing by it. The word is authenticity, and the first thing to clear away is what it has come to mean. We tend to use it now to suggest that somewhere inside, you is a true, fixed self, your real you, and that being authentic means finally uncovering it and expressing it, like wiping the dust off a hidden statue. But that is not at all what Sartre meant. Remember the foundation. There is no statue under the dust. There is no finished self waiting to be found. So authenticity cannot mean discovering who you really are. There is nothing yet to discover. Authenticity, for Sartre, is something harder and braver than self-discovery. It is the honest acknowledgement of your own freedom and the willingness to live from it without illusion. It is dropping the pretenses, No longer hiding in the role, no longer hiding behind the past, no longer letting the gaze of others quietly do your choosing. It is standing in the open room, feeling the dizziness, and saying clearly, "This is mine. I am choosing. I am the one writing this, and I will not pretend otherwise." Notice what authenticity is not. It is not comfort. Sartre is not offering peace or self-acceptance in the soft modern sense. He is offering lucidity and ownership, which are harder things. The authentic person still feels the anguish. The weight of freedom doesn't lift. They simply stop lying about whose weight it is. And here is the quiet, practical heart of it. You do not become yourself by looking inward and waiting to find out who you are. You become yourself by choosing and acting and committing out in the world, in public, in deeds. The self is not the cause of your actions sitting behind them. The self is the slowly accumulating result of them. You are not expressing a person who already exists. You are building one, choice by choice. And the building is never finished while you live, which turns the whole familiar picture inside out. You have been waiting, perhaps, to feel like the person you mean to be before you act like them, waiting for the confidence to arrive before you do the brave thing, waiting to become disciplined before you begin. Sartre says it runs exactly the other way. There is no such self waiting in the wings to arrive. You do the brave thing, and the courage is made in the doing. You act, and the self follows. First the deed, then slowly the person. So the gap you started with, between who you are and who you mean to be, is real. But it is not a gap between your current self and a hidden truer one. It is simply the distance between what you have done so far and what you might choose to do next. And that distance is crossed the only way distances are ever crossed: by moving. But before all of this is gathered into a final answer, it's worth slowing down and following these ideas down into the corners of an ordinary life where freedom is hardest to hold on to, into the labels we hide behind, the people we love, the gaze of others, the fact that it ends, the dizziness it brings, and what it might actually look like to live this way. We've named bad faith the quiet lie we tell ourselves to escape our own freedom. The café waiter was a vivid picture of it, but it's worth slowing down because bad faith almost never looks that dramatic. Most of the time it looks like an ordinary Tuesday. Listen to how we talk about ourselves now. I'm an introvert. I'm just a type A person. I'm not a morning person. I'm bad with names, bad at math, terrible with feelings. We have a whole industry of tests and labels and types, and we wear them like nameplates. And often that's harmless shorthand, a way of noticing a pattern. But watch what happens when the label stops describing a pattern and starts deciding the future. I can't do that. It's just not who I am. In that single sentence, 1,000 separate choices, made one at a time, quietly harden into a thing you simply are. Fixed, finished, beyond question. That is bad faith in its everyday clothes. The label becomes a wall you build around your own freedom, and then point to as the reason you can't move. It hides in our work too. There's a way of saying my job that means more than what you do for money. It means who you are, the whole of you, sealed and defined. And there's a strange relief in that. If you are your role completely, then you don't have to face the open question of who you might otherwise choose to be. And now there is a new and powerful version of it, one Sartre never lived to see, but would have recognized instantly: the curated self, the profile, the feed, the brand, a version of you, performed for an audience, polished and consistent. There is nothing wrong with presenting yourself to the world. The bad faith begins when you start to believe the performance is the person, or when you hide behind it. That's just my online self. As though the one doing the performing were someone else entirely. In every case, the move is the same, and the comfort is the same. A fixed identity relieves the dizziness of being free. If you are a settled, known thing, you don't have to keep choosing who to become. But the pattern was never a nature. It was a habit of choices, and a habit can be chosen differently, which matters most in the place where these labels cost us the most quietly, in how we love. Nowhere does the question of freedom get more tangled than between two people who love each other. Sartre looked hard at love, and what he found was a beautiful, almost impossible knot. Ask yourself what you actually want when you love someone. Not a captive, not a machine programmed to stay with no choice in the matter. That would be worthless, and you know it. You want them to choose you, freely, of their own accord, out of all the lives they could have had. The whole value of being loved is that it is given freely. And yet, you also want it to be certain, secured, guaranteed. You want never to have to worry that the free choice might one day swing the other way. And there is the knot. You want their freedom, and you want to capture it. And those two wishes pull against each other forever. To fully possess someone is to crush the very freedom that made their love worth having. To leave them fully free is to live always with the possibility that they could choose otherwise. Sartre thought love lived permanently inside that tension, and that much of love's suffering comes from trying to escape it. The jealousy, the need for constant reassurance, the small attempts to manage and control, all of them efforts to nail down a freedom that, by its nature, can never be nailed down. But this is where Simone de Beauvoir took the same idea, somewhere warmer and, in the end, wiser. She agreed about the danger, but she described a way through it that Sartre reached for less surely than she did. Authentic love, she said, is not one freedom trying to capture another. It is two freedoms turning toward each other and choosing, again and again, to support each other's becoming. Not wanting the other smaller, safer, more contained, but wanting them larger, freer, more fully themselves. And she named the trap with great precision, because she had watched it laid especially on women. The temptation to dissolve yourself into the person you love, to make yourself into an object for them, to live through them, to hand them your freedom and call it devotion. That, she saw, is bad faith wearing the mask of love. The cure is not to love less. It is to keep your own freedom while honoring theirs, to remain two people, becoming side by side. Which points at something larger. Love is only the most intimate case of a truth that runs through your whole life, that you are never a self alone. You are always, already, among others. Step back from love to the wider fact it belongs to. From the moment you can remember, you have lived your life in the presence of other people, and Sartre thought that changes the very texture of being a self. When another person truly looks at you, something happens that we touched on before, and it's worth feeling fully. You become, for them, an object, something seen, summed up, fixed in a judgment you cannot reach. A moment before, you were a free subject, looking out at the world. Now you are also a thing in someone else's world, and you can feel it. The flush of self-consciousness, the shame or the pride. And notice that both shame and pride are the same recognition underneath. That someone out there holds a version of you and has power over it. Sartre drew an uncomfortable conclusion from this. He thought there was a kind of conflict built into the heart of being with others. Each of us is a subject who turns the other into an object simply by looking. We cannot both be pure, free subjects at the same instant. The gaze passes back and forth, and someone is always, for a moment, the one being seen. And here is the bind that makes it so human. You cannot simply withdraw from all of this, because you also need other people to be anyone at all. You come to know yourself, in part, through their eyes. The recognition of others is woven into your sense of who you are. So you are caught, dependent on the very gaze that turns you into an object. The great temptation is to solve the discomfort by surrendering to it, to let other people's judgments become the final word, to live for the audience, to become whoever you are seen as, to let the crowd or the family or the imagined watchers in your own head write the self you were supposed to be writing. That is the room with no exit, not a punishment imposed from outside, but one we build ourselves out of borrowed opinions. The way out was never to flee other people. It is to let them see you without letting them rule you, to receive their view of you, honestly, even gratefully, while keeping the pen in your own hand, to be among others and still the author. And all of this, the roles, the love, the endless negotiation of the gaze, happens under one last pressure, the one we work hardest never to look at directly, the fact that it ends. There is one fact sitting underneath every choice you will ever make, and most of the work of an ordinary life is spent not looking at it, that one day there will be no more choices. Sartre thought carefully about death, and he came to a conclusion that set him apart from other thinkers of his time. Some of them believed that facing your own death is what wakes you up, that death, held steadily in view, is what makes a life authentic and urgent and real. Sartre pushed back hard. For him, death is not some profound possibility you live toward. It is the abrupt end of all your possibilities. It arrives from outside, often at random, and instead of crowning your freedom, it simply cancels it. It is the one event that is not yours to live, because it is precisely the end of your living. And so he refused a comforting idea that many people reach for, that death is what gives life its meaning. It can't, he said. Meaning is something only the living make, and death is exactly the place where the making stops. To hand the meaning of your life over to your death is to look for significance in the one spot where you will never be present to find it. But do not mistake this for despair, because there is a quiet, clarifying gift hidden inside it. Death gives your life no meaning, and yet your finitude changes everything. Because your time is not unlimited, your choices are not rehearsals. There is no infinite reserve of tomorrows in which you will finally, at last, become the person you mean to be. The deferral we all practice, I'll begin when, I'll change later, I'll really start living once, runs the whole time against a clock that does not stop and will not be argued with. Death does not tell you what to do with your days. It is silent on that, completely. It only guarantees that the days are counted and that every postponed one is drawn from a finite supply. So the urgency this brings is not morbid, and it is not fear. It is simply the recognition that the meaning has to be made here, in the time that there actually is, by you, now. And to stand honestly in all of this at once, free, responsible, and finite, produces a very particular feeling. We touched it early on. It's time to sit with it directly. We called it anguish, the dizziness before your own freedom. It returns here on purpose, because it is not a problem to be solved or a symptom to be cured. It is something to be understood. Start with the difference between anxiety and ordinary fear, because Sartre was careful about it. Fear is pointed at the world. You fear the icy road, the bad news, the figure in the dark, something out there that could happen to you. Anxiety, in his sense, points the other way. It points back at yourself. It is the strange dread that rises when you realize that nothing out there is finally deciding your next move, that the deciding is yours, and that there is no escaping it. He gave a piercing little example. Picture someone who has resolved, firmly, completely, to change tomorrow, to quit the habit, to begin the work, to finally become the person they keep meaning to be. They mean it with their whole heart. And then, underneath the resolve, a quiet dread, because they know, they can feel it, that yesterday's resolution has no power to bind today's freedom. The promise you made to yourself does not reach across the night and force your hand in the morning. You will have to choose again, fresh from nothing, when the moment comes. Nothing carries the choice for you. That is the vertigo. And so, very understandably, we run from it, into bad faith, into busyness, into the soothing pretense that we are fixed, settled things who don't have to keep choosing. But here is the turn Sartre wanted you to make. Anxiety, faced instead of fled, is not your enemy. It is the felt texture of being free. It is the actual sensation of touching the openness of your own life. The person who never feels it has not escaped it. They have usually just become very skilled at not looking. So the goal was never to make the anxiety disappear. To numb it completely would be to numb the freedom it reports. The goal is to let it be there, to recognize what it is telling you, which is simply this: you are free, and this is yours, and then to choose anyway. Not after the dizziness passes. With the dizziness. That is what it feels like, from the inside, to be awake to your own life, which leaves only the question everything has been circling toward. What does it actually look like? Not in theory, but in an ordinary day, to live this way. So much of this can float in the abstract. It's worth bringing it all the way down to the ground. What does it actually look like on a Tuesday to own your freedom instead of fleeing it. It begins with reversing the order you've probably been living by. You have likely been waiting to feel like the person you mean to be before you act like them, waiting for the confidence to arrive before the brave thing, the motivation before the work, the certainty before the leap. Sartre says it runs the other way. The self follows the deed. You do the brave thing slightly before you feel brave, and the courage is built in the doing. You act, and the person assembles behind the action. So the practice is simple to say and hard to live. Act first. Don't wait to become. Begin, and let the becoming catch up. It means catching the excuses that wear the costume of facts. That's just who I am. I can't help it. It's too late for me now. Each one, gently, translated back into the choice it's hiding, not to punish yourself, but to take back the freedom you'd quietly handed away. It means treating your past as material, not as a verdict. It happened. It is real. And it does not get to decide all by itself what comes next. It means choosing and then owning the choice, including the ones that go wrong. Authenticity was never about getting it right. It is about not disowning your own authorship, even when the page is messy. It means letting other people be free too, receiving their view of you without surrendering to it, and in those you love, wanting them larger and freer rather than captured and contained. And it means commitment, throwing yourself into something beyond yourself, into work and people and the world. Because freedom was never realized by endless searching inward. It is realized in what you actually do. None of this is comfort. It is lucidity and ownership, which are harder and better than comfort. And it is not a destination you finally reach. It is a way of moving. So one last time, the question we began with. Why aren't you who you mean to be? Not because that person is hidden somewhere inside you, waiting to be found. Not because the time isn't right, or the circumstances aren't ready. Only because becoming them is something you do, and not something you wait for. And it is done the way every real thing is done, by the next honest choice. And then, the one after that. There is no truer self waiting at the finish line. There is only the walking. And you can begin it now. So, why aren't you the person you keep meaning to become? Sartre's answer, gathered from everything we've followed, is quiet and a little merciless, and strangely kind underneath. It is not because you haven't found yourself yet. There is no self to find. It is not because the circumstances aren't right. They will never be fully right, and they were never the deciding thing. It is not because you lack some quality the better version has and you don't. That quality isn't a possession. It's a practice. It is, he would say, because becoming that person is frightening, and the ways of not becoming them are endlessly comfortable, because it is so much easier to stay in the role, to recite that's just who I am, to wait for permission, to live inside what others expect, to keep the better self safely in the future where it never has to be tested. Because bad faith works. It really does soothe the dizziness. It lets you keep the dream while declining the risk. And the cost of that comfort is simply your life. The actual one. The only one. the one being spent right now in the deferral. But hidden inside this hard answer is the most hopeful thing Sartre ever offered. If you are not who you mean to be because of a fixed flaw, a missing piece, a broken nature, then you would be genuinely stuck. But that was never the diagnosis. You are not who you mean to be because of a habit of fleeing your own freedom. And a habit is not a cage. A habit is just a choice you've been making for so long it started to feel like a fact, which means the distance can close. Not by waiting, not by finding, by choosing the next small thing and then the next, until the person you've been meaning to become is simply the person you've been, lately, becoming. You are not a fixed thing that has failed to live up to itself. You are a freedom that has been pretending to be a fixed thing, and the pretending can stop whenever you decide it does. Of course, Sartre is not the only one to have stood where this leads. It is worth, briefly, hearing the others. Sartre's picture of radical freedom is powerful, and plenty of serious thinkers believe it claims too much. It's worth letting them speak. Against Sartre, the determinists, much of modern science suggests we are shaped far more than we'd like by forces we never chose, by genes, by brain chemistry, by conditioning, by the long machinery of cause and effect. On this view, the feeling of free choice may be partly an illusion the mind tells about itself. Sartre heard this and pushed back hard. He thought that reducing a person to their causes was itself a kind of bad faith dressed up as science, a sophisticated way of setting down the weight of responsibility. The disagreement is real, and it is still alive today. Against Sartre, from another direction, Freud and the idea of the unconscious. If much of what drives us is hidden below awareness, then we are not the clear, free authors Sartre describes. We are partly run by a self we can't even see. Sartre found the unconscious deeply suspicious for a revealing reason. He thought it was one more excuse, a way of saying it wasn't really me. It was something in me I'm not responsible for. He insisted that even our self-deceptions are things we are doing, not things being done to us. And there is the religious answer, the oldest one, that there is a God, and therefore a given purpose, that essence does come before existence after all, that you were made for something. Sartre, an atheist, built his entire philosophy on the opposite assumption, and was honest that everything changed depending on which way you answered. Many thoughtful people answer differently than he did. The split is genuine, and it deserves respect rather than a winner. And then there is the person who stood closest to him of all. Simone de Beauvoir took these same ideas about freedom and carried them somewhere Sartre never fully did, into ethics and into the lives of women, with a line that echoes his own. One is not born, but rather becomes a woman. The self made through choices, yes, but always inside a world of real power, real constraint, real others. In some ways, she completed what he started. The honest conclusion is that Sartre does not settle the matter, but he asks the question that won't let go. Not what made you, but what you are going to do about it. And that question, even his critics admit, is hard to ever fully put down. There is one last turn in Sartre's thought And it is the one people least expect from a philosopher of radical freedom, because you might assume that a world with no given values, where each of us invents our own way, would collapse into pure selfishness. Do whatever you want. Nothing matters. You alone decide. Sartre took it the other way entirely. In a famous lecture after the war, he argued that when you choose, you are never only choosing for yourself. In choosing how to live, you are quietly putting forward an image of how a human being might live. You are, he said, choosing for all of humanity. When you choose honesty or courage or care, you are saying with your life, this is a way a person can be. Your choice becomes a small piece of evidence about what we are capable of. And that makes freedom heavier, not lighter. You are responsible not only for yourself, but for the picture of humanity your life quietly paints. The weight doesn't shrink, it widens. Which is why Sartre's freedom was never about retreating inward to find yourself. It pointed outward, toward commitment, toward action, toward what he called engagement. You do not become yourself by withdrawing from the world to discover your essence. There is no essence to discover. You become yourself by throwing yourself into the world, by choosing, committing, acting, and standing by what you've done. And so, after all of it, we arrive at the simplest possible summary of a notoriously difficult man. So let everything we've followed gather into something you can carry with you. Sartre's starting point was that you arrived in this world with no blueprint, existence before essence, no maker's plan, no fixed nature, no hidden true self waiting to be found. You are not a paper knife, made for a purpose. You are the stranger thing, a being that exists first and defines itself afterward through everything it actually does. That makes you free, completely, and so completely that it can feel less like a gift than a sentence, condemned to be free, always choosing, even when you pretend not to, always responsible for what you make of the material you were given. And because that freedom is heavy, because it makes us dizzy, we are endlessly inventive at hiding from it. We shrink into our roles. We excuse ourselves with our past. We dissolve into the judgments of others. Bad faith, in all its gentle, reasonable forms, is simply the art of not feeling how free we actually are. The way out is not comfort, and it is not self-discovery. It is authenticity, owning the freedom, dropping the pretenses, and understanding the thing that turns the whole picture around. That you do not find yourself and then act. You act, and the self is what's left behind, accumulating, choice by choice. So the person you keep meaning to become is not hidden inside you and not waiting on the far side of better days. They are not a self to be discovered. They are a self to be built, and the only tools have ever been your actual choices, the real ones, the small ones, the next one. You are what you do, not what you intend, not what you feel you could have been, not the better version always starting tomorrow. You are the sum of your actual choices, and you are not finished, and you are holding the pen. That was what Sartre found and tried imperfectly to live. He spent his life choosing loudly in public, getting much of it wrong and some of it right, refusing to the end to become a fixed and finished thing. He died in Paris in 1980, and tens of thousands of people filled the streets for the funeral of a man who had told them over and over that they were free. And the question he left behind is waiting for you in the morning, the way it waits for everyone. Not who were you meant to be. There is no such person. Only this, quieter and far more open. What today will you choose to do? Thank you for listening. If this stayed with you, the question it leaves isn't one that gets answered once. Sartre thought a life was something you keep choosing every day, never settled, never finished, and that this was not a burden to escape, but the very thing that made it yours. If you'd like to go further, the gentlest doorways into Sartre are short. Existentialism is a humanism, the lecture where he lays the whole vision out plainly. Nausea, his novel, where you feel the strangeness of existence from the inside. No Exit, the play that gave us hell, is other people. And when you're ready for the deep water, being and nothingness, where all of it lives in full, alongside them, Simone de Beauvoir's The Ethics of Ambiguity, which carries these ideas somewhere even Sartre couldn't quite reach. One last thought to rest on. Freedom in Sartre's hands was never the absence of limits. It was what you do with what has been done to you. Whatever has been done to you, hold on to that. The next thing is still yours to choose. Until next time.